Hey everyone, and welcome back to Remember This Tech. In today's episode we're going to be kind of doing an all ASRock build. It's going to be a budget build in that we're going to test this system out and compare the FPS numbers against my previous video a while back where I used the 8600G 6-core 12-thread setup, and I used this card here, the brand new ASRock Intel Arc B580 12 gig video card, and the performance was pretty damn good for the price. And if you can get this card for $269, $279 at MSRP, it provides tremendous bang for the buck. 1440p gaming, awesome 1080p gaming. So we're going to be pairing it today with another ASRock system part, the B450M HDV Rev 4 motherboard. Now this board I got for 50 bucks on sale, brand new. It has a drawback though. It's only PCI Express 3.0. Now this card screams for bandwidth. And I'm thinking, well, what if someone was to go this route and use this board and then an AMD Ryzen 4500 CPU? And that is only capable of PCI 3.0 as well. So we're going to use all the same benchmarks that we did from the 8600G test in the games and compare it to this. It's a 6-core 12-thread CPU, but the 8600G is a little faster. If you were to go this route, will it handicap you? Will it have less FPS? Are you better going with the new system and a little bit more money for a better board? Well, they're both kind of budget entry systems. So let's get to the testing and find out. Come on, let's go!
time for some bloody work.
Make it quick. Taking crowd fire! Get her down! Advance team! Open fire! That's that location! Enemy contact! Ah! Of course we're out!
Scout squad is ready and able.
Outnumbered! Be ready! Kill those fucking squareheads! What's the mission?
Not your lucky.
So my final thoughts on how this Ryzen 4500 system did with the B450 motherboard and the Intel Arc B580 graphics card. Let me be clear before I read off some of the comparisons and kind of explain what they mean here, that the two different CPUs have two different amounts of cache, and the 8600G has a higher boost clock of 5.1 gigahertz. Also, the B450 motherboard used only 16 gig of RAM because it only has 2 slots, and the B650 motherboard had 32 gig of DDR5 6000 megahertz. So 3200 megahertz RAM versus 6000. To get a 100% comparison between whether the PCI Express 3.0 versus the 4.0 system, whether it hinders the system performance or not in FPS, I'd have to drop the same CPU into the two different motherboards, but alas, the Ryzen AM4 4500 uses the AM4 socket and the AM5 socket for the 8600G, so you're not going to get 100% apples to comparison. The best I could do in the future is take a 5700X CPU on an AM4 platform and use the same graphics card and two different motherboards, the B450 and the B550, and square them off. Now, that's not what we're comparing today. Basically, we're comparing a budget build system and giving you numbers and explaining what they mean, and whether or not, if you went with this budget 450 B450 system, would you get acceptable playing frame rates, FPS, that you could actually justify it and get by and play your favorite games at 1440p? Obviously, the newer system has speed advantages that can and does contribute to higher numbers in a lot of these cases. The first game is Red Dead Redemption 2 with the Ryzen 4500. Max FPS that hit was 122.6 FPS and a 1% low of 57.8. And on the 8600G system, we got a max of 140 FPS and a 1% low of 79.3. Now, let's break this down a little bit for that. The max FPS is 14.68% increase between the two systems, and a 1% low FPS increase of 37.2% compared to the Ryzen 4500 plus the B580 graphics card. In Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p 100% resolution on the Ryzen 4500 system, the high FPS of 80 and 1% low of 39.5. The 8600G system, however, got a high of 88.3 per FPS and a 1% low of 57.4. So what does this mean? This means that the Ryzen 8600G performs 10% better in peak FPS and 45% better in 1% lows compared to the 4500G. Also, in Cyberpunk 2077, I did a comparison at 1440p with Intel Xe on, and the Ryzen 4500 got a high of 95 FPS and a low of 45.9. The 8600G got a high of 138 FPS and a low of 70.5. This means that the Ryzen 8600G performs 45% better in peak FPS and 54% better in 1% low FPS compared to the Ryzen 4500G. In Borderlands 2 at 1440p full resolution, the 4500 system got 216.6 FPS for a high and 1% low of 67.3. The 8600G got 288.6 FPS and a 1% low of 99.2. This means that the high FPS, this means that if you break it down, that the 8600G got a 33.24% increase in high FPS numbers and a 1% low of plus 47.4% increase over the Ryzen 4500 system. with the same graphics card. Now in Baldur's Gate 3 at 1440p full resolution, the Ryzen 4500 system got a high of 152.3 FPS and 1% low of 55.5 FPS. The 8600G got a high of 122 FPS and 1% low of 86.3. Okay, those numbers seem off, so let me clarify this. This suggests that while the Ryzen 4500 system achieved a higher peak FPS, the 8600G actually provided a much smoother gaming experience with significantly better 1% lows. So just because your system's putting out these crazy high FPS high numbers, you really need to take into account the other 1% lows, because those dips like this, you hit the really low points, you're going to see jerkiness and stuttering across the board on your game, and you don't want that. So The Witcher 3 at 1440p at 100% resolution, the Ryzen 4500 got a max of 74.1, 1% low of 50.8, and the 8600G got 99 FPS and a 1% low of 53.2. In GTA 5 at 1440p at 100% resolution, the Ryzen 4500 got a max FPS of 173.4 and a 1% low of 86.6 FPS. While the 8600G got 188 FPS and a low of 5.9. Why did GTA 5 tank the 1% low on the 8600G? I'm not really sure. I didn't rerun the benchmark. I didn't have time. It could be that I got an Intel driver update when I did the 4500. It had been weeks, so that's quite possible. Some of these games are a little flaky with the Intel drivers still, but they're ironing that out. In Starfield at 1440p, XESS Intel was on in the 4500 system, and it got a max of 72.9 FPS with a 1% low of 44.80 FPS. But on the 8600G, we had 100% resolution with no XESS on. Then we got a max of 70.8 FPS for high and a 31.6 low. Clearly, if the 4500 system has on XESS and barely got the FPS that the 8600G got with it off, well, enough said. Stalker 2. This game is kind of broken still. It's still all over the place. So take these numbers with a grain of salt, okay? And some of these games, Stalker 2 game doesn't play that great with Intel. But anyways, 1440p, 100% resolution, the Ryzen 4500 got a max of FPS of 66.8 and a low of 37, 1% low. And the 8600G got 53.6 FPS and a low of 33.9. So there you have it. Now, to conclude this, again, we weren't comparing apples to apples. We're just trying to see whether or not you can get by with this budget system. And clearly you can in most systems, especially at 1440p, what I tested specifically at. There may be a couple things you might want to consider before running out and grabbing this budget system. Is upgradability and longevity for long-term support. The AM4 platform system support eventually will go away. There's so many CPUs out there for it though. You can definitely snag yourself a really powerful system though. A lot cheaper than what you might be able to build a new AM5 system. If the difference was $100 or maybe $150, my professional recommendation would be to go with the AM5 system for upgradability, support, longevity, and overall you get a better, you get more power and ability to play with more eye candy on, and you can drop in non-G CPU down the road and you're good to go. But if this is your only option, You still got parts warranties. They're all brand new parts on these systems for the AM4, and you know the performance is still pretty good. Plus, this 4500 system, see, this Ryzen 4500 and the B450 can support Windows 11, so you're not out with that OS support either. And I'm sure it'll run equally fine under Linux, if not a lot better. So, thanks for coming along with me on this journey, and thanks for watching. Remember this tech.